The Underground, Ideas into Action presents an Underground Chat, where we bring the underground conversation to you. Today's topic, the 2020 impact on children, with Jamie Murray Branch, emeritus clinical professor and speech-language pathologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Welcome, Jamie. It's so good to see you. I've missed seeing you. Tell me how you're doing. How is family?
Thank you, Sue. It's good to see you too, and I hope Mike and your family are all doing well. These have been really challenging times across the world. And so COVID-19 has put an abrupt stop to all of the social interactions we've had with our nuclear family as well as our Woku family. And it's just alarming to think about how many lives have been lost due to this virus, and has underscored how interconnected we all are in a very positive way. But then again, there's the downside of that too, when there's a disease that's proliferating like this one is. So we're trying to use Zoom and all these other methods to stay connected and to keep things going and support each other. But I will be happy when I can give you a hug the next time I see you again. And we're doing all we need to do. We know it's necessary to do this to help flatten the curve.
So I think that it's interesting when we take a look at the bigger picture, and then we drill down on our own emotional reaction to what's taken place over the last, now it's almost 4 months of real transition and change. One of the things that fascinated me about what's taking place is that there's a lot of conversations about our business environment. There's a lot of conversations about how COVID has changed our lifestyles and so on. And we've also seen the conversation around children. Yeah. And that was where, with your background and your clinical experience, I'm just very fascinated with what your observations are, because as you know, I have children, I have grandchildren, and I can see this impacting the generations to come. And so I was just kind of wanted to introduce that into our conversations, because when we talk about vulnerability, I think that we have to think not only of our immediate, but what does this look like, for another generation?
Yeah. Well, through my clinical teaching at the University of Wisconsin and my volunteer work with Head Start, I've remained in touch with children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, and families who are living at or below the poverty line. And I think COVID really brought to the foreground a lot of the issues related to racial inequities in our country as they impact on health, finances, housing, jobs, you name it. And so what I've seen, and I just did some work on this through my national association, was looking at the impact of adverse experiences that children have during these early developmental years. And there was an interesting study done by Harvard from the Center of the Developing Child, and they coined the term ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So we know that in normal development, we all experience stress at different points in time, and those are healthy experiences for us. They're usually short term. We have a nurturing family around us to help us navigate that, and we develop resilience and we move on. But when you have a number of adverse childhood experiences affecting you, food insecurity, home insecurity, parents are busy dealing with all of what life is throwing at them, they're maybe not able to provide as much time and attention to you as a young person, then the cumulative effect of that can be very, very detrimental in all aspects, development of the brain, because you're releasing high levels of cortisol and you're at this ready state all the time. So it's hard for you to process and bring information in and to really learn. And as a speech and language pathologist, we know about the importance of these early years. I'm talking, birth through ages 5 and 6 for speech and language development. So there's all this neuroplasticity ready to soak in all this great information and learn. And I'm sure you've witnessed that with your own grandchildren and can remember with your own children. But when you're at this heightened state of alertness and fear or uncertainty, then you really can't take advantage of the learning opportunities that avail themselves. And you couple that with other kinds of stressors that are not typical across the board, but are more particular to children of color, since we know a large number of children of color are living at the poverty level or below, and they represent the largest number of children attending Head Start programs. Those are federally funded programs to help families in poverty. Then you have, racism and the unpredictability of that, and maybe environmental violence, or uncertainty in your environment as to whether it's a secure place or not. And you really have a recipe for major trauma and behavioral deficits in children.
When I was preparing for this discussion with you, I was excited to hear your perspective, and I was also saddened by some of the research that's demonstrating what the impact is today and the potential for the impact going forward. One of the common characteristics across all, I think, across all spectrums is the idea that what you mentioned was fear. And I want to segue in a minute, but one of the points was made that for every child, for all of us that have generations, whether it's our parents or our children or our grandchildren, the fear of death and the unknown associated with not just the transition of life, but the fact that being pulled away and out of your environment and not being able to say goodbye and not being able to, and some of the research was showing how that's affected children and their fear of having their parent leave, or can they say goodbye to grandma. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think that the other lesson that I'm learning as I go through this is what we're seeing with the social unrest and Black Lives Matter and the whole issue that the fear of death is something that I don't think I certainly have learned more about since this conversation started. And I think that it's something that has hit me to my core. So I just, the fear of leaving your house, the fear of a child, going. And I just was curious about that area as well with you. And I'm deeply saddened by what's taking place, but I'm also really want to learn.
Yeah. Well, I think that many Americans, even very well educated Americans, if they've not really had an opportunity to interact in more integrated environments with people across multiple SES backgrounds, if they're not familiar with our nation's history related to government sponsored and perpetuated discrimination across multiple domains, access to finances, access to good schools, access to health. Much of that is can be linked to segregation, and a lot of our country is still very, very segregated. I visited a friend in Arizona not too long ago in January, and this is someone I've known since childhood, and she lives in kind of a planned community called Sun City, and it was beautiful, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will know about it, but I was there for 4 days, and I never saw anyone of color except for the grounds people who were working on, various yards and landscaping. So, I mean, that was just kind of a shock to me that people could live their entire lives in this particular setting and never engage or encounter someone who has skin like mine. So I think the George Floyd incident, the video, people speaking more openly. I've shared stories more often now with my non-minority friends about, the ongoing issues related to race, how you're constantly having to deal with that. Even as an educated person, somebody who's in middle to upper socioeconomic ranks, when you travel, when you're outside of areas where people know you well, what they see is your race. And our country still has a lot of implicit bias associated with race. And so it's been hopeful to me, I guess, that when looking at the protests and the makeup of the groups across the country as well as the world, that there's such diversity in those groups, that there's sort of a recognition and a deeper understanding of how racism plays itself out, not only in policing, but in your opportunities and how you can maximize your potential. It's not just a matter of pulling yourself up. There have to be opportunities without barriers to make that happen. So, I mean, I'm saddened by everything, and it's very stressful, and I think kids are feeling that and have felt it, but it's kind of more right in front of them at this point.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good time. I think now more than ever, we're really focused on humanity, and we're focused on the voice of humans. And I think worldwide, we're seeing the outpouring of the need to get involved, to engage. I also have been looking at how our message and our actions are critical to demonstrating that not only have we been seeking diversity, but we actively have to have systems in place now to ensure diversity. To give you a couple of examples, the underground has focused on conversations that are tough to have. And there's vulnerability to those conversations, even to our conversation right now. And part of what we did a couple of years ago is said, look at our audience. And our audience, here we're talking diversity, and we have an audience that not only doesn't reflect people of color, but it's also from an age standpoint. So we've actively taken topics, and we've looked to be more inclusive and to be intentional about our inclusiveness. And now with I think the heightened awareness of how systemic these issues are, I've been looking at things like we often work with our crediting clients to find new leaders, and we work with boards on governance. So our organization is going to take action in a way that we will literally look for people to represent the membership and actively engage in initiatives that make change. And I think that I want to go beyond this event, the horrific events that now we're becoming more aware of, and go to fundamental change. Renee speaks to that as the CEO, commitment to change. And for all of us, looking at what that means.
Right. Well, I applaud your efforts, and really, I think as a minority, when you feel as though the audience that's seeking you out is really open to hearing what you're saying, they're really actively listening, as you just described your efforts. It allows you to have that exchange that's needed, and to understand each other on a deeper level. And, as a clinician, whenever you are seeing someone for the first time and you're trying to diagnose the problem, You're trying to get to the etiology or the cause of the problem. Why has this problem manifested itself in this way? Why are people so angry? Why is it when you go into an urban area you see only people of color living in public housing? Why are the majority of people who are in frontline jobs that are often low paying often people of color? And so to do that, you have to take a hard look at our country's history, our current policies on the local, state, federal level across multiple decades, talk to people who are living in those situations now, really understand the context and the resources and the stressors they're dealing with, and then come up with solutions that are really viable for that community. And that's going to differ from place to place and group to group. And I think that's what WOCU does on an international level. One of the reasons why I retired early, after 30 years, but I retired a little earlier than my cohort group, was so I could participate in Brian's service projects and get to see more of the world and to actually be there up close and personal. And I think that's one of the really wonderful things that WOCU does, is that they know the people they're serving, and they're taking a multi-pronged approach to try to respond to their needs for financial security.
It's interesting, the idea of us talking about something and then experiencing it. And so several thoughts came to mind as you were talking. One, regarding World Council, and that's the fact that I've often mentioned to you that when we're out in the field and we have the opportunity to work in Asia, to work in Africa, to work in Australia and the different continents and literally work with the people, it's so much more enriching from a human being standpoint than it is to, from my standpoint, to travel just to see or observe. So that's one point. The other point that I wanted to make, and this is something that I think you can help me with. We want, as an organization and as a movement, to be able to engage in a conversation that allows us to listen and to understand. And I am also right now thinking through how I express myself. How can I be inclusive and not come across in a way that would potentially offend, right? Not from a blatant perspective, but more from the standpoint of, you use the term all lives matter, and it takes away from the focus on the Black Lives Matter and the urgency of what we're dealing with. And so there's just language things that people don't understand, and we get somewhat defensive on both sides, whatever those sides are in the conversation. So tell me about that. What do you see in that, and how can you help us with that? Well,
I think that, can you hear me okay? Because someone is mowing their lawn.
Always.
I think it comes down to trust and, really believing that someone wishes the best for you and you wish the best for them, and that that everyone has something unique to offer, and each life is of value, and that there isn't sort of this, big brother, little brother, or, vice versa, that everybody has innate worth and value. And that's something that can't be automatically, created. I think people have to be, as Brian Stevenson says in his book, Just Mercy, they have to be in proximity with each other. They have to share in community with each other. They have to just kind of, hang out and be with, enjoy each other, learn about each other. And from that, then, when you have a skill set or some sort of opportunity to offer to a community or to an individual, they'll know where it's coming from, and you'll have learned about them, and your life will be changed immeasurably, and vice versa. So I think that just feeling comfortable coming out of our own little silos and entering into community with each other, and simply being together during a protest. Once we can be near each other again,
Yeah. Yeah.
putting other people's communities and that sort of thing will make that easier.
I want to share a quick little story. When I was, I think probably 11 or 12, my family moved a lot as a child, and so I actually went to 13 different schools throughout my
Yeah.
yeah. And we were in Oregon, and Oregon was very much, the community that we were in was very much a white community.
Mhm.
And we moved to Southern California into Riverside County, LA County. And I was exposed at that time in my life to a very diverse community. And at a time when I was young, and it was a change. It was a change for me. And I remember clearly thinking, this is so different, but it's so amazing. And so it was one of those moments where, and then obviously through high school, I continued, and through college, continued in very diverse communities. And my best friend and all the people that I loved and cared about were very diverse. So I look at that transition in my life, and it was significant. And so I just, as you were talking, I was just thinking to myself, at what moment do do each of us remember some type of an event that took place that may have shaped our future?
Right. No, and just think about the trajectory of your life, that it would have been so different probably if your family hadn't moved there. And not all families can move, so then they have to be very intentional in their own communities in providing their children opportunities to learn about other cultures and be among other people. It has to be a very intentional act, just like you were saying, looking for leadership from underrepresented groups has to be a very intentional act. And I know at the university, there is a lot said about trying to recruit faculty, female faculty, minorities, and yet our population is still very, very small. And so I think, people have to look again at what does happen after someone comes here and is looking for tenure and they're doing well, but they choose not to stay. Why is that? Why are all the students who are graduating from the law school and the medical schools, people of color, leaving the state instead of staying here? And those are hard questions to get answers to, but they're important to ask.
And that might circle back to the children as well, because we have to have a diverse community of children that are working together and joining hands and being prepared to go through the journey together and lift each other up. And I think that during this time, if we can reach the next generation, and we know that before the age of 5, the children are somewhat colorblind, somewhat depending upon circumstances, obviously. Even when we made those moves that I shared with you, we went from one place to another very poor, and so we found ourselves starting over each time. And when I think about where the kids are today, and they're being put in their homes, and this is a time when we have to, I think, really reach deep and recognize that we have the issues we have, but they are going to be heavily impacted by the lack of education, the lack of a safe environment, and all the things that we've experienced. So when you look for ideas into action and the things that you would recommend that we do, considering where we are and the full spectrum of generations, do you have a few thoughts to share with us?
Well, I was just going to comment on what you just said
Yeah.
too, that the school environment and those early experiences are so formative. They can be positive or negative, and unfortunately, our schools now in the U.S. are more segregated now than they were way back, before the public law for uh, integrated schooling took place. So Brown versus the
Yes.
Board of Education. So I think as long as our schools are funded by property tax, we're going to see this huge divide between the haves and the have-nots. And then that gets back to a lot of the opportunity and intergenerational wealth from owning a home, selling a home, giving. So I think we have to go back to the crux of the problem to make sure that we can give our children the best opportunity to learn about each other and learn in healthy, positive environments. And
So
we know, go ahead, Sue.
I would just say before you go on past that, the property tax comment has really just, it's so important. And I think that when we look at what we're seeing with this transition and the transition of wealth or the transfer of wealth and so on, people pull back from, continuing to fund the,
Right.
necessary educational systems. And so
Right.
I just wanted to emphasize what an important point
Yeah.
that you just made.
Yeah, and our youngest daughter works with students who live in inner city settings in the Brooklyn area, New York City area. And most of her students, they're high school age. There are lots of generations living in this small, apartment. They've experienced loss. They've seen it up front because social distancing, when you're in a small bedroom apartment is not easy to do. And also, as she's worked with these students virtually, just looking at what technology they have available. Many of them are living in public housing. They don't have internet access. Just their experience in COVID is so different from somebody who has a higher SES. And in fact, that comment I was making about adverse childhood experiences,
Yes.
the higher the number of adverse child experiences you have, the more likely you will have some sort of developmental delay, poor academic achievement, many health issues that, as you look longitudinally, will shorten the length of your life. So if we can reduce the number of adverse childhood experiences by providing food security, home, housing, reducing violence, reducing the amount of implicit bias or racism, we'll be elevating all of our citizens so that they can live these full and productive lives. So it's in everybody's best interest that as a nation we work towards that. And so since we were talking about, children, you're asking me what can we do? I think during those early years, if you really are supportive of enriching early learning experiences, Head Start is a wonderful organization that's federally funded. Right now, we're not in a center. Teachers go to homes and provide support to parents. But if you were to call your local Head Start in your community, looking at the state organization or your county organization, they could get you in touch with someone. They are in need of very basic things, diapers, that's a big one, non-perishables, learning materials that kids can use at home since they're staying at home, arts and crafts materials. That's a really great way of children being able to express what they're feeling, even if they don't have the language available to put words to how they're feeling. And it can be a wonderful tool for families to use to help counsel their children, provide them with reassurance to help them weather some of these storms. I think
Before you go to the next thing, I just wanted to say you've just inspired me, not only here locally, but with the work that I do with Global Women's Leadership Network, the idea of our local sister societies being able to not only focus on financial literacy or financial education, but to recognize that we need a head start. We need to go even deeper and be more rooted. So thank you for that.
Right. And, I think that being a really active, informed ally, as especially as the Black Lives Movement is on the front burner right now, is very important. And we know that many people are just not educated about our country's history and the policies and laws that have been put in place that result in the social ills that we're experiencing now. I just had a Zoom meeting with our state governor, Tony Evers, to talk about history curriculum from K through 12. I've served on an education committee that's looking at reframing U.S. history so that it's more inclusive and it's more accurate. And again, that will help people understand what's happening now and why, and what we need to do to make that change. So taking on that responsibility, as you've described, Sue, for becoming better educated and about race issues in our nation. A book I wanted to highly recommend, actually, is called The Color of Law, and A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. And it's by a scholar named Richard Rothstein. It's just a very well detailed review of our nation's history post Jim Crow, related to housing. But since housing is so central to, where you go to school, what access you have to different kinds of resources, who you interact with, it really sheds light on what's happening now. And I've talked to a number of my friends who are just, some are lawyers, some are doctors, very well-educated women who were just blown away by this history because it was never presented to them in their civics courses or in their, regular history classes. And as a person of color, I saw it. My family lived in public housing. My father's family lived in public housing. My dad's family was quite poor. He died young. And my mom was a school teacher, but we lived in an environment where I was often the only Black student in my grade, in my class, had some of the same challenges you had moving around, but it was different in that I was with people that knew me, but they had certain preconceived notions about me. And a lot of that was based on input that they received from their families. So I think, not only being an ally, but being a really informed ally so that you can come up with solutions and strategies that will actually address the nature of the problem.
Well, thank you very much for the recommendation and for inspiring all of us that'll watch this this discussion. The idea that what it means to really not only understand and listen, but to learn. I think we all, it's a lifetime learning experience, and some of us have, in my case, I've seen the unrest for at different times in history, and I think that digging deeper, and I think you've also pointed out a real void in our system, and that is the lack of awareness, a lack of education. I mean, there's gaps in our history, there's gaps in what we've learned. So
I've even shared some of these experiences with people in the credit union movement, and they've been surprised. And I thought that was surprising that they were surprised, based on what they do and the goodwill of the credit union movement.
Yeah.
But you don't know what you don't know, so
Well, no, I think that's absolutely right. I also think that there's an awakening happening, and the question of where this goes from the future for me. With credit unions, they're cooperatives, and quite often we think of the financial services versus the fact that they're of a community for a community, and so I think that this is a very interesting time in our industry because we do see people stepping up, and with COVID, we saw incredible responses, and we're seeing it now with the DEI collective and the pledge for change.
Right.
I also think that we're going to start to see people trying to figure this all out.
Right.
And I hope that our voices and continuing to learn makes this a long-term discussion, not a discussion that had to start and had to finish.
Yeah. I think we're at the cusp of a cultural transformation, and we are the agents of change. And I think rather than making, just kind of being paralyzed with the enormity of it, just thinking of, an individual child, an individual family that the credit union is serving. Each person, each point of contact can make a huge difference. And I was so happy to hear the LGBTQ meeting as we were driving. That was great. Again, more awareness, more understanding, less fear.
Oh, it's so true. And we're proud of the founders and the Sea Pride movement. I think that these conversations result in people taking action. And like you said, if we can just start small, take small steps, because it does seem overwhelming at different times. And with mental health being at the core of everybody's concerns right now, I appreciate you saying that, really work on an individual basis. Mm-hmm. And I look at the work that you've done as a family for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. I admire it. I, appreciate it. And I truly send you the biggest virtual hug there is.
Back at you.
I can't wait till we can get together again, but this has been perfect. Jamie, I'm just so excited to hear your voice. Yeah. You have so much that I can learn from, and I think that we can learn from, because you have an outside perspective on the fundamentals of what we're going to need for change, but you also have an inside heart to what credit unions are all about, and I just, it's a great combination.
Yeah. I've been very lucky in this position. So
we're very lucky too. So, all right. So best of the family. It's just been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, okay. Thanks so much for asking me.